The scent of 1,000 white roses choked the air, each petal a silent witness to a perfect lie. Isabel Rossi stood before a gilded mirror, the silk of her wedding gown, a cool caress against skin that hummed with a love she believed was eternal. She was 32, an accomplished architect, and pregnant with the child of Alexander Sterling III, the man who had rebuilt her world. In 10 minutes, she would walk down the aisle to meet her future. But a forgotten heirloom, a small silver locket, sent her searching for him, leading her to his private study, where a half-closed door would become the portal to her ruin. The Sterling Crest estate was a monument to old money, a sprawling stone behemoth perched atop a hill overlooking the Hudson River. It had stood for a century, its ivy-choked walls having silently observed the rise and fall of fortunes, the secret affairs, and the calculated marriages of the Sterling dynasty. Today, it was the stage for the wedding of the decade. Alexander Sterling III, heir to a global logistics empire, and Isabel Rossi, the brilliant architect who had, against all odds, captured his heart. Inside, the grand ballroom was a masterpiece of controlled opulence. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto tables laden with orchids and champagne flutes. The air was thick with the murmur of the East Coast's elite, a symphony of hushed gossip, financial boasts, and the clinking of jewelry. Upstairs in the bridal suite, Isabel felt a world away from it all. The room was a sea of cream and gold, with floor-to-ceiling windows framing the manicured grounds. Her dress, a custom Vera Wang, lay across a chaise lounge like a fallen cloud. It was elegant, a testament to classic beauty, not ostentatious. That was her influence on Alexander. She'd softened his lavish tendencies, grounding him in a way no one else could. Her maid of honor, her sister Sophia, misted her hair with a final spray. "Izzy, you look breathtaking, like you were born for this." Isabel smiled at her reflection. Her dark hair was swept into a low chignon, delicate diamond earrings, Alexander's first gift to her, sparkling at her lobes. Her green eyes, usually sharp and analytical, were soft with an emotion she still found overwhelming. The slight curve of her belly was just visible beneath the structured bodice of the gown. Their son. A new branch on the Sterling family tree, one planted in genuine love. "I feel like I'm in a dream," Isabel confessed, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. "I keep waiting to wake up." "This is real," Sophia said, her voice firm, squeezing her shoulder. "You deserve this, Izzy. After everything with Mom and Dad, after all the years you poured into your career, you deserve a love that feels like a fairy tale." Isabel's throat tightened. Her parents' bitter divorce had been the defining storm of her childhood, leaving her wary of love, skeptical of permanence. She'd built her life like one of her buildings, with strong foundations, clear lines, and no room for chaotic variables. Then Alexander had walked into her firm, a client looking for a new headquarters, and had systematically dismantled every wall she'd ever built. He was charming, yes, but it was his mind that had captivated her. He saw the world not just in numbers and profit margins, but in systems, in structures. He understood her passion for design, for creating something lasting from nothing. He saw her not just as a beautiful woman, but as an equal. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. One of the wedding planners peeked in. "Ms. Rossi, 5 minutes until you walk. Your father is waiting downstairs." Isabel took a deep breath. It was time. As Sophia fussed with her veil, a sudden, cold realization washed over her. "The locket," she whispered, her eyes wide. "What?" "Nonna's locket. The one Mum gave me. My something old. It's not in my jewelry box." It was a small, simple silver locket passed down through the women in her family. Inside was a tiny, faded photo of her grandparents. It was her anchor to her own history, a history so different from the polished, pedigreed world of the Sterlings. She'd planned to pin it inside her dress, a private tribute. "Izzy, there's no time," Sophia said, her face a mask of gentle panic. "I know where it is," Isabel insisted, a flash of memory cutting through the haze. "I was showing it to Alexander last night. I think I left it on the desk in his study." The study was his sanctuary, a mahogany-paneled room on the same floor, filled with leather-bound books and blueprints of his corporate conquests. It was just down the hall. "I'll be right back. 2 minutes, I promise," she said, already moving, her silk dress rustling with urgency. "Don't let my dad come up. Just stall." She slipped out of the suite, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. The hallway was quiet, the sounds of the party below a distant hum. She felt a thrill of bridal rebellion. A bride on the loose, moments before her ceremony. She imagined Alexander's amused smile if he saw her. As she approached the heavy oak door of his study, she heard voices from within, muffled but clear. One was Alexander's, his tone smooth and confident. The other was deeper, older. She recognized it as Walter Davenport, a formidable competitor in the shipping industry, and, surprisingly, a guest at their wedding. She'd thought their rivalry was bitter. Isabel paused, her hand hovering over the doorknob. It was bad form to interrupt, especially now. She should wait. But a strange, cold thread of unease began to weave its way through her joy. Something in Alexander's tone wasn't right. It wasn't the warm, loving voice he used with her. It was the voice he used in the boardroom. Chilly, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. She leaned closer, telling herself she just wanted to wait for a pause in the conversation. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of an opening. Through it, the words began to filter, sharp and clear, each one a tiny shard of ice against her skin. "The contracts are signed. The board is pacified. The merger is secure, Walter. Stop worrying." Alexander's voice was laced with an impatient sort of calm, the sound of a man swatting away a fly. "I'm not worried about the merger, Alex. I'm worried about the complication." Walter Davenport's voice was a low growl, thick with cigar smoke and privilege. "My daughter is not a consolation prize. This marriage, your real marriage to Victoria, is a non-negotiable clause. You know that." Isabel froze, her body going rigid. Victoria? Walter Davenport's daughter? She'd met her once at a charity gala, a woman with eyes as cold and grey as a winter sea. Real marriage? The words didn't compute. They were like a foreign language her brain refused to translate. "And I have honored that," Alexander replied, his voice dropping. "Everything is proceeding exactly as we planned. A year, 18 months tops. The public needs to see a respectable mourning period after the unfortunate dissolution of this first marriage. A quiet, amicable divorce. No one will question it." Isabel's breath hitched in her throat. The air in the hallway suddenly felt thin, stolen. Dissolution. Divorce. He was talking about them. About her. About the life she was carrying. "And the architect. Rossi," Walter pressed. "She'll go quietly." A low chuckle. It was Alexander's. The sound, once a source of warmth and delight, now scraped down her spine like rusted metal. Isabel is sentimental, but she's not stupid. She's a pragmatist at her core. When the time comes, she'll be compensated. Generously. She and the child will be set up for life, far away from here. They won't be a problem. She'll understand it was just business. Just business. The phrase echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of her mind. The foundation of her world, the love, the trust, the future she had so carefully designed with him, cracked. It didn't shatter, it simply turned to dust, revealing a hollow, empty void beneath. Every shared glance, every whispered promise, every tender touch was instantly recontextualized. They weren't moments of love, they were transactions, steps in a calculated plan. "She thinks you love her," Walter stated, a hint of something that might have been pity in his voice. "She believes what she needs to believe," Alexander said, the casual cruelty of it stealing the last of Isabel's air. Her design for the new European headquarters was brilliant. It gave Sterling Logistics the aesthetic legitimacy we needed to court your more traditional board members. Her social grace made me palatable to a new class of investors, and her condition provided the perfect cover story for a whirlwind romance and a quick marriage. A man who wants to legitimize his child is seen as honorable. It's all been very efficient. Isabel felt a wave of nausea so profound she had to brace herself against the wall, the cool plaster a stark contrast to the fire raging through her veins. Her hand, the one not gripping the wall, was pressed flat against her stomach, a desperate protective gesture. He had called their son the child, an asset, a complication, a piece on a chessboard. She was a tool, a beautiful, intelligent, and temporarily useful tool. Her love was leverage, her pregnancy a cover story. Her entire life for the past 2 years had been a meticulously crafted illusion, and she was the only one who didn't know she was on stage. "Just make sure she doesn't get any ideas," Walter warned. "Women like that, from backgrounds like hers, can be unpredictable when they feel entitled." "She won't," Alexander said, with absolute certainty. "She loves me. That's her weakness, and my greatest strength in this situation. Now let's go. I have a wedding to get to." Isabel heard the shifting of weight, the clink of glasses being set down. They were coming. Her body, which had been frozen in shock, finally obeyed her mind's frantic scream. She pushed herself off the wall and scrambled back down the hall, her movements clumsy, her breath coming in ragged, silent sobs. The magnificent dress felt like a shroud. The diamond earrings burned against her skin like hot coals. She fumbled back into the bridal suite, her face a pale, ghostly mask. Sophia rushed towards her. "Izzy, you were gone for ages. What's wrong? Did you find it?" Isabel couldn't speak. She could only shake her head, her eyes wide with a horror so deep it had no voice. In her hand, she realized, she was clutching her phone. She didn't remember taking it out, but she saw the screen was on, the audio recording app open and running. A single red dot pulsed, indicating it was still live. She must have started it instinctively the moment she'd heard their voices, a desperate need to capture the poison that was filling the air. She stopped the recording, saved the file. Her fingers moved with a chilling, detached precision, as if they belonged to someone else. "Isabel, you're scaring me," Sophia pleaded, gripping her arms. Finally, Isabel looked at her sister. The softness in her eyes was gone, replaced by something hard and fractured, like shattered emeralds. "Everything is fine," she said, her voice a hollow whisper that sounded nothing like her own. "Everything is perfect." A knock echoed through the room. "It's time, Miss Rossi." Isabel straightened her shoulders, the architect in her taking over. The dreamer was dead, but the builder remained. A structure had been condemned. It was time to bring it down. She looked at her reflection one last time. The radiant bride was gone. In her place was a woman she didn't recognize, a woman with nothing left to lose, and a blueprint for revenge already forming in the ruins of her heart. "Let's not keep them waiting," she said, her voice now dangerously calm. The walk to the grand staircase felt like a mile-long journey through a foreign country. Every detail of the estate, once a symbol of her beautiful future, was now an artifact of an elaborate fraud. The portraits of sterling ancestors lining the walls seemed to mock her with their stoic, painted eyes. The scent of roses was now sickeningly sweet, the smell of decay masked by perfume. Her father, a kind, simple man who ran a small construction business upstate, was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He looked painfully out of place in his rented tuxedo, his face beaming with a pride that lanced Isabel's heart. "Sweetheart," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he took her arm. "You look like your mother on her wedding day. So beautiful." Isabel squeezed his arm, a silent apology for the humiliation she was about to bring upon their family name. "I love you, Dad." The music began, a string quartet playing Pachelbel's Canon, the quintessential wedding march. The great doors to the ballroom were pulled open, revealing the breathtaking scene within. 400 guests, a veritable who's who of finance, politics, and culture, rose to their feet, their faces blurred into a sea of polite smiles and curious gazes, and at the end of the aisle, standing under a canopy of white wisteria, was Alexander. He looked every bit the prince from a fairy tale. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection, his blonde hair catching the light from the chandeliers. He was smiling. It was his public smile, the one that graced the covers of business magazines, charming, confident, and utterly impenetrable. It was the smile of a man who had just secured the deal of a lifetime. As she began her slow procession, Isabel's mind was a maelstrom of calculated calm. The initial, all-consuming agony had receded, replaced by a cold, crystalline fury. The architect in her had taken over, assessing the structural integrity of the situation, identifying the load-bearing points, and planning a controlled demolition. Her target was not just Alexander. It was the entire system of power and deceit he represented. It was Walter Davenport, standing in the front row next to his elegantly bored-looking daughter, Victoria. It was the silent complicity of this world where people were treated as assets, and love was a line item on a balance sheet. With every step, she felt more grounded. Her father's arm was a steady anchor in the storm. She focused on Alexander's face, watching as his smile widened, a predator welcoming its prey. He had called her sentimental. He had called her weak. He was about to learn how devastatingly wrong he was. They reached the altar. Her father placed her hand in Alexander's. His touch was warm, his skin familiar. It was the hand that had traced patterns on her back, the hand she had held while they listened to their baby's heartbeat for the first time. A fresh wave of pain threatened to buckle her knees, but she crushed it, locking it away behind a wall of ice. "You look perfect," Alexander murmured, his voice a low, intimate caress meant only for her, yet performed for the audience. "I am the luckiest man in the world." Isabel met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. "You have no idea," she said, her voice quiet but clear. The officiant began the ceremony, the familiar words washing over the silent room. Isabel let them pass, her focus laser-sharp. She watched Alexander, watched Walter, watched Victoria. She was cataloguing their faces, memorizing their serene, self-assured expressions. "And now the couple will share the vows they have written for each other," the officiant announced, turning to Alexander with a benevolent smile. Alexander cleared his throat, pulling a small card from his pocket. He began to speak, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. He spoke of destiny, of a love that defied logic, of her being the anchor to his soul. Each word, so beautifully crafted, was a lie she had once cherished. Now, it was just fuel. When he finished, a ripple of emotional sighs went through the crowd. He had played his part perfectly. "And now, Isabel," the officiant prompted gently. Isabel did not look at a card. She looked directly at Alexander, her green eyes boring into his. "I had vows written," she began, her voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. They spoke of trust, of partnership, of building a future on a foundation of honesty. But I find I can't read them, because a foundation built on lies cannot stand. A confused murmur rippled through the guests. Alexander's smile faltered, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. He squeezed her hand. A warning. "Isabel, what are you doing?" he hissed, his voice dangerously low. She ignored him, her gaze shifting to Walter Davenport. We learned so much about a person, not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet, private moments, in the conversations they think no one is listening to. She reached into a small, concealed pocket in her dress, the one she'd had sewn in for the locket she never found. Her fingers closed around her phone. "Darling, you're making a scene," Alexander said, his grip tightening, his charming facade cracking to reveal the cold steel beneath. "A scene?" Isabel's laugh was short and brittle. "No, Alexander. A scene is what you perform. I'm just pulling back the curtain." With a tap of her thumb, she selected the audio file. She turned the volume to maximum and held the phone up to the small microphone on the officiant's lapel. And then Alexander's voice, cool, calculating, and utterly damning, filled the grand ballroom. "The merger is secure, Walter. Stop worrying." A collective gasp went through the room. Alexander's face went white, his eyes wide with dawning horror. Walter Davenport looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "My daughter is not a consolation prize. This marriage, your real marriage to Victoria, is a non-negotiable clause." The recording played on, each word a hammer blow against the stunned silence. Victoria Davenport's mask of bored indifference shattered, replaced by fury and humiliation. She'll be compensated, generously. She and the child will be set up for life. She believes what she needs to believe. Her condition provided the perfect cover story. She loves me. That's her weakness. When the recording ended, the silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with shock and scandal. Every eye was on Alexander, who looked like one of the stone statues in his garden, frozen, pale, and lifeless. Isabel lowered the phone. She gently pulled her hand from Alexander's limp grasp. "My weakness," she said, her voice now ringing with a strength that stunned everyone, "was that I loved a man who didn't exist. My strength is that I will not let my son be born into a world you control." She looked out at the sea of faces, the powerful, the wealthy, the untouchable. For the first time, she saw fear in their eyes, the fear of being exposed. She turned, her back to the man she was supposed to marry, and faced the wedding guests. "I believe this ceremony is concluded," she announced, her voice unwavering. "Thank you all for coming. Your gifts, however, can be considered forfeit. I have a feeling the Sterling and Davenport families will need the liquidity." Without another glance at the wreckage on the altar, Isabel Rossi walked back down the aisle, alone. Her head was held high, her spine straight, the train of her magnificent dress sweeping behind her like the wake of a battleship. The fairy tale was over. The war had just begun. The chaos erupted behind her the moment she cleared the ballroom doors, a cacophony of reporters shouting, cameras flashing, and the frantic, enraged voices of the Sterlings and Davenports. Isabel didn't look back. Her father and a bewildered Sophia flanked her, forming a protective barrier as they navigated the labyrinthine halls of the estate. "My car is around back, by the service entrance," her father said, his voice a low, steady rumble that cut through her shock. He was a builder. He knew how to handle a demolition. "Sophia, Get her out of this dress. In a small, forgotten powder room, Sophia's trembling fingers worked at the dozens of tiny buttons on the back of the gown. Izzy! My God, I can't even— Don't, Isabel said, her voice flat. Don't think. Just act. The dress slid to the floor, a pool of ruined dreams at her feet. She stepped out of it, and into the simple emergency jeans and sweater Sophia had packed. The transformation was instant. The bride was gone. Isabel Rossi, architect and survivor, was back. They made it to her father's Ford pickup, a humble chariot in a sea of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, just as the estate security realized the bride had fled the scene. Her father peeled out of the gravel driveway, leaving the gilded cage and its frantic, shrieking inhabitants behind. The first 24 hours were a blur of motion and adrenaline. They didn't go home. She knew Alexander's reach, her apartment, her father's house, Sophia's place. They would all be compromised. Instead, her father took them to a small, run-down motel 2 hours north, the kind with flickering neon signs and questionable bedspreads. He paid in cash. It was there, in the anonymity of the shabby room, that the walls Isabel had built for herself finally crumbled. The fury that had sustained her through the ceremony drained away, leaving behind a grief so vast and empty it threatened to swallow her whole. She curled up on the bed and wept, silent, racking sobs for the man she'd loved, for the family she'd lost, for the child who would never know the warmth of an unbroken home. Sophia held her, murmuring soothing words, while her father stood guard by the door, his face a grim, protective mask. By morning, the story was everywhere. "Sterling wedding implodes," screamed the headlines. Tabloids published grainy photos of her walking down the aisle, juxtaposed with images of a furious Victoria Davenport storming out of the estate. Her phone, which she'd finally turned on, was a useless brick of notifications. Texts, missed calls, news alerts. She ignored them all except for the bank alert. Alexander had already frozen her accounts. The vindictive pettiness of it was what finally stopped the tears. It was a power play, a move designed to cripple her, to force her to come crawling back and accept his generous compensation. He still saw her as a problem to be managed. A new kind of resolve, cold and hard as steel, settled in her chest. He had torn down her life. She would dismantle his empire, brick by brick. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed resources, information, and an ally who hated Alexander Sterling as much as she now did. Only one name came to mind: Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a ghost in the financial world, a brilliant venture capitalist Alexander had ruthlessly destroyed 5 years earlier in a hostile takeover. Alexander had not just bought his company, he had salted the earth, using the media to ruin Thorne's reputation, ensuring he could never rise again. Isabel had been dating Alexander for a few months when the final act of that drama played out. She remembered Alexander gloating about it over dinner, calling it a masterclass in corporate warfare. She had Thorne's old number in a forgotten corner of her contacts list from a time when she was coordinating meetings. It was a long shot, but it was the only one she had. From a newly purchased burner phone, she dialed the number. It rang 4 times. She was about to hang up when a man's voice, rough and wary, answered. "Who is this? Mr. Thorne?" Isabel said, her voice steady. "My name is Isabel Rossi. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. She could hear the faint sound of waves. He was somewhere far away from the city. "I saw the news, Miss Rossi," he finally said, his tone unreadable. "Quite the performance. My congratulations." "It wasn't a performance," she corrected him, her voice sharp. "It was a declaration of war. I assume, after what he did to you, that you understand the difference." Another pause. What do you want? I have the blueprint to Alexander Sterling's life, she said, choosing her words carefully. I helped design his headquarters. I sat in on his meetings. I know his investors, his habits, his pressure points. I know the foundation is corrupt. I need someone who knows how to place the charges. You're talking about revenge, Thorne said, a hint of weariness in his voice. It's a fool's game. It consumes you. This isn't just revenge, Isabel shot back, her hand tightening on the phone, her other hand resting on her belly. This is about justice, and it's about ensuring my son grows up in a world where the name Sterling doesn't cast a shadow over his entire life. He tried to take my future. I'm going to take his. The conviction in her voice must have struck a chord. The weariness in his tone was replaced by a flicker of interest. Where are you? He asked. Nowhere he can find me. Stay that way, Thorne said. I have a private airfield in Massachusetts. A plane will be waiting for you in 48 hours at a small municipal airport outside Albany. It will take you to a place where you can think, where you can plan. Come alone. From the moment you step on that plane, you cease to be Isabel Rossi, the jilted bride. You become a ghost. Can you do that? Isabel looked at her father and sister, her heart aching. This was the price. To win, she had to disappear completely, even from the people she loved. Yes, she said, her voice raw but resolute. Good, Thorne replied, because Sterling won't see us coming. He's looking for a sentimental woman. He won't be prepared for an architect of ruin. The flight to the Cayman Islands was the beginning of her erasure. Isabel Rossi, the rising star of New York architecture, vanished. She left a tearful goodbye with her family, promising to stay in touch through encrypted channels Thorne would provide. Her father, his face etched with worry but his eyes full of fierce pride, pressed a thick roll of cash into her hand. For the baby, he'd said. You build him a better world, you hear me? The island was not a tropical paradise for her. It was a fortress. Marcus Thorne owned a secluded villa on the quiet, less trafficked side of Grand Cayman, a starkly modern structure of white concrete and glass cantilevered over a private, rocky cove. It was beautiful, but it felt like a bunker. Marcus was waiting for her on the veranda. He was leaner and greyer than she remembered, with a restless energy that the calm Caribbean setting couldn't soothe. His eyes, a piercing blue, held the ghost of a man who had lost everything and had never quite recovered. Ms. Rossi, he greeted her, not offering a hand to shake. Welcome to the war room. The villa's interior was not decorated with art, but with technology. Screens lined one wall, displaying market data, news feeds, and satellite maps. A long conference table served as the central hub, littered with laptops and encrypted hard drives. For the first few weeks, Isabel did little but sleep and eat, the emotional and physical toll of her ordeal finally catching up with her. The morning sickness was relentless, a constant, physical reminder of the life growing inside her, a life inextricably linked to the man she now despised. Marcus left her alone, respecting her need to grieve. He provided healthy food, prenatal vitamins, and silence, but one morning, she woke with a new clarity. The fog of sorrow had lifted, leaving behind the cold, hard landscape of her purpose. She found Marcus on the veranda, staring out at the turquoise water. "Show me everything you have on Sterling Logistics," she said, her voice clear and firm. A slow smile touched Marcus's lips for the first time. "I was wondering when you'd be ready to draft the new blueprints." Thus began their alliance. It was not one of friendship, but of shared purpose. They were two wounded animals, united against a common predator. Marcus was the strategist, the expert in financial warfare. He understood shell corporations, short selling, and the arcane language of international finance. Isabel was the architect, She didn't just see Sterling Logistics as a company. She saw it as a massive, complex structure. She spent her days not in grief, but in analysis, with the knowledge she'd gleaned from 2 years at Alexander's side, overheard conversations, documents left on his desk, his own arrogant monologues about his business strategies. She began to map out the entire edifice of his empire. "He's over-leveraged in his Asian shipping routes," she told Marcus one evening, pointing to a complex diagram she'd sketched out on a whiteboard. He financed the expansion with a variable rate loan from a Swiss bank, betting on a new trade deal with China. "But I was at a dinner with Senator Rawlings a few months ago. The deal is dead. The senator told me himself. Alexander doesn't know it yet. He thinks Rawlings is in his pocket." Marcus's eyes lit up. "If we leak that information to the right financial blogger at the right time, his shipping futures will tank. He'll face a margin call he can't possibly meet." Another time, she recalled a detail about the construction of his new automated warehouse in Rotterdam. "The environmental impact report was falsified," she said simply. "I saw the real one. His VP of European Operations, a man named Klaus Richter, buried it. Alexander gave him a promotion for it." "Klaus Richter," Marcus mused, typing furiously into his laptop. "I remember him. Ambitious, but greedy. Let's see if Herr Richter has a price." As her pregnancy progressed, her belly swelling with the new life she was determined to protect, her focus became sharper, her resolve more absolute. She was no longer just demolishing Alexander's creation. She was clearing the ground for her own. She pored over books on international law and finance, absorbing information with the same intensity she'd once reserved for architectural theory. She and Marcus worked in a quiet, focused rhythm. He would execute the attacks, an anonymous tip to a regulator, a carefully worded rumor planted in the financial press, a wire transfer to a disgruntled executive's offshore account. She was the architect, identifying the structural weaknesses, the faulty materials, the corrupt foundations upon which Alexander had built his kingdom. She never spoke of love or betrayal. Her pain was a private, tightly guarded thing, a reactor that fueled her cold, logical campaign. She was fighting for her son, Leo, a name she had chosen herself. He would not be a complication. He would be a legacy, her legacy. One evening, as a storm rolled in off the sea, lashing the windows with rain, Marcus looked up from his screen. "The first domino is about to fall," he said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "The news about the China deal just broke. Sterling Logistics stock is in free fall. Welcome to the war, Isabel." Isabel looked out at the churning grey ocean, her hand resting on her round belly. She felt the first flutter of a kick, a tiny, insistent pulse of life. She wasn't afraid. She felt a profound and terrifying calm. Alexander had taught her that love could be a weapon. He had no idea she had learned the lesson so well. For Alexander Sterling III, the world had always been a predictable, controllable system. It operated on the principles of leverage, influence, and the simple, immutable fact that everyone had a price. His wedding day was meant to be the triumphant culmination of his greatest transaction, the perfect fusion of personal and corporate strategy. Instead, it had been a public execution. The immediate aftermath was a nightmare of damage control. The Davenport merger, the prize he had sacrificed everything for, was dead. Walter Davenport, publicly humiliated, had not only pulled out of the deal, but had declared a corporate blood feud, vowing to see Sterling Logistics burn. Victoria, his intended queen, had become his most vicious and vocal critic in the press. His father, Alexander Sterling II, a man who viewed emotion as a market liability, had been merciless. "You were outplayed," he'd said, his voice like chipping ice, "by a girl from nowhere. You let a personal asset become a catastrophic liability. Fix it. Fixing it, however, was proving impossible. Isabel had vanished. He had hired the best private investigators money could buy, put surveillance on her family and friends, and used his contacts in law enforcement to flag her passport. Nothing. It was as if she had stepped off the face of the earth. His initial rage gave way to a grudging, infuriating respect. He had underestimated her. He had seen her as a beautiful, brilliant, but ultimately manageable piece in his grand design. He had never imagined she possessed the capacity for such ruthless, theatrical defiance. He tried to control the narrative, painting her as an unstable, scorned woman. But the recording was irrefutable. It had gone viral, a delicious slice of schadenfreude for a public that loved to see the mighty fall. He became a pariah, a meme, a late-night talk show punchline. The name Sterling, once synonymous with power, was now synonymous with scandal. But the real trouble began 3 months after the wedding. It started small. A financial blog with a cult following published a well-sourced piece predicting the collapse of a key Sino-American trade deal. Within hours, Sterling Logistics' stock, which was heavily invested in Asian expansion, plummeted. He was hit with a massive margin call from his Swiss lenders. It was a blow, but a survivable one. He dismissed it as bad luck. Then, a month later, an anonymous tip to the Dutch authorities triggered a surprise inspection of his new Rotterdam warehouse. They uncovered falsified environmental reports, leading to massive fines and a suspension of operations. The project, his European flagship, was now a billion-dollar paperweight. Things began to unravel faster. A key executive was poached by a competitor. A lucrative government contract was suddenly and inexplicably revoked. A story broke about unsafe labor conditions in one of his subsidiary companies, sparking union protests and boycotts. Each incident, on its own, was a problem. Together they felt like a coordinated, systematic assault. It was death by 1,000 cuts, and Alexander couldn't find the hand holding the knife. He blamed Walter Davenport, but the attacks were too subtle, too precise for Davenport's blunt force style. This was different. This was architectural. The realization came to him late one night in his study, the same room where his world had begun to unravel. He was staring at a map of his global operations, a web of shipping lanes, warehouses, and distribution centers. He felt like a king watching his kingdom crumble, beset by a phantom enemy. He was looking at the plans for the Rotterdam facility when he saw it. The attack hadn't just shut it down, it had targeted the precise linchpin of his entire European distribution network. The executive who had been poached wasn't just any executive. He was the only one who knew the access codes to their proprietary logistics software. The failed trade deal wasn't just bad luck. It was the one variable that could trigger the punitive clauses in his financing agreement. Whoever was doing this didn't just know his business. They knew how he thought. They understood the intricate structure of his empire, and they were dismantling it with the same precision with which it had been built. A cold dread, an emotion he hadn't felt since childhood, crept over him. He pulled up the security footage from the wedding day for the 100th time. He watched her walk down the aisle, her face a serene, beautiful mask. He had seen love in her eyes. Now, watching it again, he saw something else. He saw the cool, appraising gaze of an architect surveying a building just before its demolition. Isabel. It was her. It had to be. The thought was absurd. How could she, a pregnant woman with no resources, orchestrate such a sophisticated campaign against him? It didn't make sense. And yet, in his gut, he knew it was true. The strategies were too elegant, the targets too personal. He felt a sudden, hollow ache in his chest that had nothing to do with stock prices or frozen assets. It was the ghost of a feeling he'd dismissed as a weakness. He remembered her laughing in his kitchen, her face dusted with flour. He remembered her asleep next to him, her architectural sketches spread across the bed. He remembered the fierce, protective look in her eyes when they saw the ultrasound of their son. He had called her love a weakness. He had believed it was the tool that gave him control. He now understood, with terrifying clarity, that he had never been in control at all. He had created his own destroyer, and he had armed her with everything she needed to bring him to his knees. The hunt for Isabel Rossi was no longer about damage control. It was about survival. 9 months after she fled the wedding, in a quiet, state-of-the-art clinic in Switzerland that Marcus had arranged, Isabel gave birth to Leo Rossi. He was small, perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that promised to be the same shade of emerald green as her own. The moment the nurse placed him in her arms, the world shifted. The cold, burning fire of revenge that had sustained her for months was instantly banked by a fierce, primal wave of love. Holding her son, she understood that her war against Alexander was no longer about the past, about her broken heart or his betrayal. It was about the future. It was about creating a world where Leo could be his own person, not the discarded scion of a disgraced tycoon. Her purpose, once a sharp and singular point of vengeance, now broadened into a vast landscape of protection. She took a month to heal, to bond with her son, to simply be a mother. Marcus, surprisingly, was a patient ally. He handled the day-to-day operations of their campaign, sending her encrypted updates that she read while Leo slept on her chest. When she returned to the war room, now a secure apartment in Zurich, she was changed. The hardness in her eyes had been replaced by an unshakable resolve. "It's time to end this, Marcus," she said, bouncing a cooing Leo in her arms. "A final move, something he can't recover from." Marcus nodded, pulling up a file on the main screen. "Sterling Holdings International. It's his father's company, the parent corporation of Sterling Logistics. It's the original source of the family's wealth, the crown jewel. It's also privately held, an impenetrable fortress." "Nothing is impenetrable," Isabel countered. "Every structure has a flaw. We just haven't found it yet." Her mind went back, sifting through memories, conversations, stray remarks. She remembered a heated argument between Alexander and his father one Christmas. Alexander had wanted to take the parent company public, to inject it with new capital. His father had refused, shouting about tradition and control. "This company was built on a handshake with John D. Rockefeller himself," the old man had roared. "Its charter is ironclad." "The charter?" "Marcus," Isabel said slowly, her eyes lighting up. "Find the original incorporation documents for Sterling Holdings International. From the 1920s. It took a week of deep diving through dusty digital archives and calling in favors from contacts in Delaware. But Marcus found it. He projected the century-old document onto the screen. Most of it was standard legal boilerplate. But then, Isabel saw it. It was a morality clause. Tucked away in the bylaws, a relic of a bygone era, was a stipulation that the acting CEO and chairman, a position held by the Sterling heir, must be a person of unimpeachable moral character, and that any action which brought significant and public disgrace upon the family name was grounds for immediate removal by a vote of the board. The board consisted of 5 members: Alexander, his father, and 3 ancient, lifelong Sterling loyalists. "It's an antique," Marcus breathed, "completely unenforceable in a modern court." "We're not going to a modern court," Isabel said, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across her face. "We're going to the court of public opinion, and more importantly, we're going to his father." The plan was audacious. It was her masterpiece. They leaked the charter to the New York Times, along with a carefully curated dossier detailing the full extent of the wedding scandal, supplemented by new information they'd uncovered about Alexander's other unsavory business dealings. Simultaneously, through an anonymous third party, Isabel sent a package directly to Alexander Sterling II. It contained no threats, no demands for money. It contained only one thing: a simple, framed photograph of her, and a beautiful, 1-month-old baby boy. On the back, she had written in her elegant script, "Leo Rossi, your grandson." The story exploded. It was the final, devastating blow. The narrative was no longer just about a cheating fiancé. It was about the legacy of one of America's great industrial families. It was about a disgraced heir and a disowned grandchild. For Alexander Sterling II, a man obsessed with legacy above all else, it was the ultimate humiliation. His son had not just made a mess, he had violated the sacred trust of their dynasty. The pressure was immense. The 3 loyalist board members, men of his father's generation, were appalled by the public dishonor. Alexander III was summoned to the family estate. He found his father in the study, the photograph of Leo sitting on the desk between them. The old man didn't shout. His voice was quiet, funereal. "You have become a liability to the name your great-grandfather built," he said. "The board has been called. You will tender your resignation by morning." Alexander stared at the photograph. The baby had his eyes. In that moment, the full weight of his losses crashed down upon him. The company, the money, the power, they were all gone. But looking at the face of the son he would never know, he realized he had lost something infinitely more valuable. He had lost a future. He had lost a family. He had lost the only woman who had ever seen him as anything more than a name on a building. The architect of ruin had completed her work. The Sterling Empire, so meticulously constructed, had been brought down not by a corporate raider, but by a broken promise and a mother's love. The fall was swift and brutal. Alexander Sterling III, the titan of industry, was stripped of his titles, his authority, and his access to the family fortune. His resignation was front-page news. Sterling Holdings International publicly announced a restructuring installing Alexander II as interim CEO, a move designed to calm the markets and restore confidence. Cut adrift, Alexander found that the world he had commanded no longer answered his calls. The friends who had flocked to his parties and yacht trips now looked through him at restaurants. The business partners who had once courted his favor now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by the specter of his own arrogance. His personal accounts were not frozen, but they were finite. He was forced to sell his penthouse, his collection of classic cars, his art. Each sale was a small death, a chipping away of the identity he had spent his life cultivating. He moved into a small, sterile apartment on the Upper West Side, a place with no history and no view. The Davenports, smelling blood in the water, launched a series of predatory lawsuits, picking at the carcass of his now vulnerable ancillary businesses. He was buried in legal fees and depositions, forced to relive his betrayals under the cold, fluorescent lights of conference rooms. He had expected to feel anger, to feel a desire for revenge of his own. Instead, what settled over him was a profound and crushing emptiness. In his pursuit of absolute control, he had built his life like a house of cards on a foundation of deceit. And Isabel, with one gust of truth, had blown it all away. He spent his days walking aimlessly through Central Park, a solitary, anonymous figure among the crowds. He found himself watching families, watching fathers push their children on swings, a lump forming in his throat. He would pull out his phone and stare at the grainy news photo of Isabel and their son, Leo. He had a son, A boy with his eyes. A stranger. The nights were the worst. In the silence of his apartment, the ghosts of his choices came to visit. He heard Isabel's laughter. He remembered the weight of her head on his shoulder. He recalled the conversation in his study, the casual, cruel words he had used to dismiss her and their child. She'll understand it was just business. How could he have been so blind? He had treated the most profound human connection he had ever experienced as a mere transaction. He had traded love for leverage, a family for a merger that never even happened. He had won the game, but lost the world. One day, he received a simple, unmarked envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typewritten address, a coffee shop in Geneva, Switzerland, and a date and time for 1 week from today. There was no name, no message. But he knew. It was from her, a flicker of hope, something he hadn't felt in a year, ignited within him. Maybe this was it. A chance to explain, to apologize, a chance to offer the generous compensation he had once spoken of so callously, though he now knew no amount of money could ever repair what he had broken. He booked a flight immediately, his mind racing with what he would say, how he could possibly begin to atone for the ruin he had caused. He clung to the fantasy that she wanted to see him, that there was still something left to salvage. He arrived at the coffee shop an hour early, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a cup of coffee. He was no longer the imposing figure he once was. He had lost weight, his expensive suits replaced by a simple sweater and slacks. There were new lines of exhaustion and regret etched around his eyes. He waited. The appointed time came and went. She didn't appear. After an hour, a waiter approached his table. "Mr. Sterling?" the waiter asked. Alexander looked up, surprised. "Yes? A package was left for you." The waiter handed him a thick manila envelope and walked away. With a feeling of dread, Alexander tore it open. It wasn't a letter. It was a stack of legal documents. The top page was a petition for sole legal and physical custody of Leo Rossi. Attached to it were copies of the wedding day recording, financial statements detailing his corporate downfall, and sworn affidavits from former employees attesting to his character. It was a meticulously constructed, airtight legal case. The final document was a restraining order, prohibiting him from coming within 500 yards of Isabel Rossi or her son. At the very bottom of the page, a single, handwritten note was clipped. It contained only 3 words. It was just business. The hope that had flickered within him was extinguished, replaced by the cold, hard finality of his defeat. This meeting wasn't about reconciliation. It was a closing statement. It was her final, perfect move, checkmating him completely. She hadn't just destroyed his empire, she had legally and permanently erased him from the life of his own child, using his own ruthless logic as the weapon. He sat there, in a foreign city, completely and utterly alone, a king with no kingdom, a father with no son. He had lost everything, and he finally, truly, understood why. 5 years later, the city of Milan was alive with the buzz of Design Week. At the heart of it all, a new architectural firm, Rossi Thorn, was unveiling its flagship project, a revolutionary sustainable urban living complex that had the industry talking. The lead architect, Isabel Rossi, stood on a balcony overlooking the central piazza of the complex. She was no longer the heartbroken bride or the cold-blooded strategist. She was a woman who had found peace, not in revenge, but in creation. Her firm, which she co-owned with Marcus Thorne as a silent financial partner, was thriving. She was respected, innovative, and happy. A small hand slipped into hers. "Mummy, can we get gelato now?" Isabel looked down at her son, Leo. He was a bright, curious 5-year-old with her dark hair, and, she had to admit, Alexander's piercing blue eyes. He was the center of her universe, the foundation of her new life. "In a little bit, sweetie," she said, smoothing his hair. "Mommy just has to finish up here." From across the piazza, she saw a man watching them. He was older, grayer, and stood with a quiet humility that was a world away from the arrogant titan she had once known. It was Alexander. He hadn't violated the restraining order. In the years since their meeting in Geneva, he had made no attempt to contact her or Leo. But once a year, on Leo's birthday, he would travel to whatever city they were in and simply watch. From a distance. He never approached. He never made a scene. It was a strange, silent penance. Isabel had learned about his life through Marcus's reports. After losing everything, Alexander had disappeared for a year. He'd resurfaced in Africa, working for a non-profit that built schools and wells in impoverished communities. He wasn't a donor. He was on the ground, managing logistics, using his skills for something other than profit. He had liquidated his remaining personal assets, putting the money into a blind trust for Leo, a trust he had no control over and that Isabel had never touched. He was, by all accounts, a changed man. A man trying to build something new from the rubble of his old life. Their eyes met across the square. There was no anger left in her, no hatred, only a quiet, sad understanding. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of familiarity, but of respect. He wasn't looking at the woman he had betrayed, but at the woman she had become. Isabel gave a slight nod in return. It was an acknowledgement, a closing of a chapter. She had once thought her revenge would be his complete destruction. But she had learned that true victory wasn't about tearing someone else down. It was about building yourself up so high that they could no longer cast a shadow on you. She turned away from him, her focus returning to her son. Her creation. Her future. "Okay, my love," she said, her voice full of warmth as she scooped him into her arms. "Let's go get that gelato. What flavor do you want?" "Chocolate!" Leo squealed, wrapping his arms around her neck. As she walked away, leaving the past behind her in the fading light of the Italian sun, Isabel Rossi knew she had finally designed a life with a foundation that could never be broken. Isabel's journey from a betrayed bride to the architect of her own destiny is a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit. She transformed her deepest pain into her greatest power, not by seeking simple revenge, but by meticulously building a new life on a foundation of integrity, love, and self-worth. Her story is a reminder that sometimes the most magnificent structures can only be built after the old ones have been burned to the ground. She didn't just get even, she got better. If this story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and subscribe for more tales of intricate drama and stunning revenge.